Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler, talking to you again about a better human story. Again, assuming you've seen any of the previous ones. And I want to present another piece of the picture. And when I use the word piece, I also want to put that into the context of I'm calling my better human story an integrative vision of our story, and where we are in our evolution as the civilization creating species. I'd like to emphasize the integrative aspect of it. There's a need to see things whole. That is really a key aspect of what I think is going on in our world now. That we see things too much just in pieces. So this is not just about that first idea that I put out about the past, indicating how our species embarking upon the path of civilization inevitably unleashed a destructive social evolutionary force that makes the spirit of the gangster have a disproportionate say in what our world becomes. It's also about the future. It's not just about the bad guys, the destructive forces. I have another earlier video in which I also talk about the good guys, what the nature of the forces are at work that emerge out of an evolutionary process, which has built into it a preference, you might say, for what is, let's say, pro-life, what can survive and perpetuate itself over what cannot. And that choice crafts creatures for whom there is a better and a worse that they experience. There are a lot of dimensions to this, and I'm presenting these dimensions one at a time. But it would be a mistake to think this is like one piece, another piece, another piece, sort of like a scattered set of ideas, because it is an integrative vision. The social scientific analysis of the forces at work, I don't know if it is social scientific. Sometimes, well, I won't go there. Sorry about that interruption. It combines with there being a spiritual dimension in a defensible sense of the word, that something called a spiritual dimension to human experience, which is a reality, not necessarily everybody, but it's a reality, is something that got chosen by that process that chooses what can survive over what cannot. All these different things I'm presenting in pieces, but I want to emphasize the importance of seeing how they all actually fit into one coherent picture. That's part of what makes me feel that this could have an impact. There's a lot put together here that enables one to make sense of a lot of different components of the world and a lot of different dimensions of the human world, which I just think can work. Doesn't answer all the questions, but it sheds a lot of light and it asks a lot of the right questions, which is what I want to get to now. because we're going to go from the past, which has to do with the implications of a civilization creating species embarking on the path of civilization. But now I want to talk about the human future. Call this the fate of human civilization. If civilization inevitably meant getting swept up in a somewhat destructive social evolutionary process, where is a species going to end up? Now, I say, with respect to the past, in identifying the destructive forces at work, I emphasize inevitability. It is inevitable that if the emergence of civilization means a plunge into an anarchic situation. And it is inevitable that an anarchy will generate a war of all against all. And it is inevitable that those things that can prevail and survive in a war of all against all won't be random, but will be a selection of those things which make one powerful in a war of all against all. And those criteria are not particularly good ones for human beings, which is why those criteria give us an ugliness to the human face as we see it in history that is not reflective of human nature. That's the inevitabilities. But as for the future, I consider that indeterminate. That's the realm of possibility. It is possible that the destructive forces that led us to, that emerged with civilization, will lead us to self-destruction. I mean, if we have a nuclear holocaust, which is one of the possibilities, if you look at the forces that made that possible, in spite of, for example, the fact that humankind has understood that danger since 1945 or 49 or whatever you want to say, that we knew that we were entering a very dangerous time. If we imagine a scenario which leads us to a nuclear holocaust, we'll be able to identify a coherent force that operates in the human world that drove us into the abyss. On the other hand, if we manage to create a civilization that escapes nuclear holocaust or environmental disaster, planetary catastrophe, that also will depend on whether the destructive forces or the forces for wholeness prevail in this battle. I think it's a toss-up. I've said that's, I don't mean I have some solid calculation of a 0.5 probability of X and same for Y. No, it's just a gut feeling. I mean, I feel like it could go either way. And I don't know or understand enough about how this might unfold. History's given me some real surprises, not all of them pleasant. So I don't know where we could end up, but I can envision both ways. Neither one of them seems inherently implausible. We could destroy ourselves or we could get our act together. By the way, when I say get our act together, I want to indicate that we've been muddling through for X thousands of years. But we won't be able to continue to muddle through because we've got the power now to destroy ourselves. And that's a recent phenomenon. I'm almost old enough that both of the ways it's been during my lifetime that both of the ways that we might destroy ourselves have become visible to us as a reality. There's an atomic bomb in 1945. It's about the time I was conceived, actually. If you do the math, born April 46. Anyway, my understanding of the world, I was of the first generation to come to understand the world where the idea of mutual assured destruction was, part of how we perceived the world situation. The United States and the Soviet Union had so many warheads and such powerful means of delivering them to multiple targets on each other's territory. So many potential nuclear detonations that let's talk about make the rubble bounce. I mean, it's just there's the word overkill. Anyway, I don't know how much. I think that people sensed that there was a possibility that we would not only destroy ourselves and our civilization, but we could do so much damage to the biosphere that I never saw it laid out. Would it have been as big? Would an all-out exchange between the two nuclear superpowers been as big a deal as what happened when the asteroid hit the Earth 66 million years ago? Excuse me. Well, I don't know, but the idea that we might actually destroy life on Earth was one that I absorbed into my consciousness. And then it was still later that we started to really pay attention as a society to the need to take care of the environment. I went to college in 1963 and 1960 through 67, and I don't think that I could have called myself an environmentalist in any meaningful sense during that time. But by the time 1969, yeah, I was an environmentalist by then, and I think that I was sort of part of an emergent consciousness that we were destroying our planet in various ways. And as is often said, even Richard Nixon, at that time, he created the Environmental Protection Agency. There was a time that we started to recognize that we were so powerful in terms of the living systems of the planet. It was still at a sort of a small level, like we didn't like the sight of Lake Erie burning. But it was a significant change. And now with climate change, that awareness has come to the point where we kind of, well, at least a very large segment of us are looking at what we see in the papers about climate in the news. We're envisioning that what may be coming could be somewhat catastrophic for civilization and for life on Earth. Maybe not as big as what we envisioned about the nuclear holocaust. And when I say envisioned, there was a time in October of 1962 called the Cuban Missile Crisis when people when that was actually a real possibility. President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev danced their way through that crisis without that nuclear exchange. But it's, as I understand it, people who studied the situation say it was a real possibility that that mutual assured destruction would end up being a scenario and not just the warning that humankind was hoping it would be. So we face two things now that that show, we could destroy ourselves, and previous generations were doing all kinds of destructive things, but never could envision their destructiveness being civilization ending. And that's where we are now, which is that we envision that possibility. And it's a new thing to think about, but obviously extremely important to think about. If it's 50-50 or anywhere near that, we really need to be thinking about it. So the human future is not yet determined. We need to be thinking about how do we avoid destroying ourselves. We're not going to be able to keep muddling through. And the reason we know that is that now we see that we have so much power, both in terms of the power to alter the atmosphere enough to upset the flows of on which the biosphere depends, from rising seas and other temperature and precipitation patterns to which everything is adapted, being disrupted, thrown into upheaval, to an international system that still enables a single sociopath, Vladimir Putin, a human monster, Vladimir Putin, just to stand in for, to make this whole world think again about nuclear weapons because he's brandishing his nuclear saber while he commits aggression in the middle of Europe. We got close enough, too close for comfort. I remember being in high school, watching a football game and looking over toward Minneapolis, wondering if this is the moment. This is October, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Might the skyline of Minneapolis become a nuclear, a mushroom cloud? That was where the world was for a few days. And we've got places right now where we think about nuclear possibilities, not just with Putin and Ukraine, but also scenarios where two major nuclear powers might go to war against each other over Taiwan. If one of them decides it's going to seize the Taiwan by force, when the other nuclear power has given increasingly clear indications that it will defend Taiwan. Here, I'm not saying either that we're going to have a nuclear war. I'm just saying that we can see that it's a possibility that if 1962 might have been that, then if we keep on having these kinds of episodes that look like that is not an impossibility. It's like playing Russian roulette. You spin the chamber, you pull the trigger. Well, anybody who plays Russian roulette long enough is going to end up dead. I mean, if it's the usual Russian roulette where you got 6 chambers and 1 bullet, you could do the probabilities. What's the probability that he'd still be alive spinning the chamber on the 12th round? At what round does it become 50-50? Well, here we are. We're still playing Russian roulette. And so with respect to war, we've got a dynamic built into civilization that we simply need to change. We've had war since the beginnings of civilization. It was inevitable. But any civilization, any creature's civilization that indulges itself in thinking it's going to muddle through while it keeps on spinning the chamber is going to end up dead. We need to come up with a solution to the question, what kind of world do we need so that a nuclear holocaust is not a possibility? There is no such bullet in the chambers. You aren't having to rely on luck after luck after luck to survive for the long haul. What would that international order look like? And likewise with climate change. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know a certain amount about climate change. I don't know that anybody really knows what kind of scenario we would be in for, how catastrophic. But the signs are that climate change has been visible for a rather long time. I actually wrote, a paragraph about it in my 1,600-page PhD dissertation on the parable of tribes in 1976. Got my degree in 77. And we know that Exxon knew about climate change back in around the same time. So how the world is ordered now, one thing we know about it is that we could know what we knew then. At least enough people knew what we knew then. And then you could go to, say 1992, when there was the Rio conference about climate change. And then in the late 90s, Kyoto. You can trace that there has been awareness of this crisis for a very long time. And you can look at the way that we've responded and how much more dangerous the situation appears to be now because we've responded the way we have instead of the way we might have 45 years ago or 25 years ago or 30 years ago, that we could have been doing something different. But we have indications that it's a shame. And we don't know how well we're going to respond from here. In America, we still have a political party that is dedicated to blocking our doing anything about it. So you've got various forces at work. You've got a fossil fuel industry that did what it did to prevent our doing anything about it. We have a disordered world. And if we destroy ourselves that way, it will be because of the kinds of forces you can look at to see how was it that we knew all this and didn't manage to do anything about it. And are we going to get our act together? Are we going to more generally order our civilization so that we're in sufficient harmony with the requirements of life on Earth that we are still enmeshed in, even if we've extricated ourselves in some ways? are we going to be able to order what we do so that we're going to be able to keep going on this planet, thriving, living on this planet as human beings without undoing the foundations of our lives, following our nests, etc. It remains to be seen. But one thing I want to say is that we should look at this test that we're undergoing as being an inevitable consequence of being a civilization-creating animal. It's really, integrated with the whole thing. Let me show you how. Any creature that steps onto the path of civilization, what that initially means is a new way of living in relation to the natural world to sustain life. On this planet, we had gardens and horticulture, and we had penning of animals and a herding life, stuff like that. So it is changing the relationship with the natural world. The initial farmers are doing something that wasn't shaped by natural selection. And the herders, who are no longer hunting animals but are creating herds under their control, have stepped out of the natural order. So the idea that you might be out of harmony with that natural order is built into the nature of what it means to step onto the path of civilization. And then there's the parable of the tribes, which says that the problem of war is an inevitable consequence of the rise of civilization. Civilization plunges, extrication from the natural order is into disorder, the disorder of anarchy, which is the war of all against all, which means that only certain of the various cultural options can survive and spread, those that equip a society to prevail in a war of all against all, which is hardly random. By the way, I need to stress how non-random it is. I mean, the societies that are large can eliminate the ones that are small. The ones that have effective central control can eliminate the fragmented. The societies that are bent on making people uneasy and restless might be able to prevail over people who simply loved life. I develop all kinds of stuff like that. There's been a selective process because power, which is what is being selected for, is a function of just about every dimension of a culture. It's not just things like technology. The iron displaces the bronze and all that. The people on horseback displace those who haven't domesticated the horse. It's not just at that level. It's also social organization, political organization, the nature of the moral culture, the nature of the family structure, the motivational system that's instilled in the individuals, the psychology of individuals in a whole lot of ways. All these things that can contribute to a society's power. And so over the millennia, the selection for the ways of power is continually selecting for certain power contributing cultural possibilities over others. And it's like a NCAA tournament that takes place over 5,000 years or whatever, and gradually the mill grinds fine, if I can mix a metaphor, and you end up with the same face of civilization wherever it emerges. It emerges independently in 6 different places on the planet. The Nile and the Tigris Euphrates and the Indus and the Yellow River in China, and 2 places in Mesoamerica. In all those places, it emerges with some of the same basic characteristics of things like tyranny, periods of chronic war, emerging out of it, things like tyranny and enslavement, differences, but the spirit of the gangster is unfortunately accentuated. So war is there just like environmental destruction as a possibility. And in a disordered system, which is selecting for power, which I'm saying is an inevitable aspect of civilization upon its rise, that will be combined with an ever-increasing power being wielded by that creature's civilization. Now, let me go into why that is ever increasing. So you've got both the problem of war and environmental degradation, and power is increasing, making both of those potentially more destructive at each turn. And it's ever increasing because culture is cumulative. Whichever creature steps onto the path of civilization will obviously be capable of culture. And culture means that the creature knows how to pass along through the generations what it's got: a language, certain categories of thought, technology. Children get brought up to be members of those societies in all kinds of dimensions. So that implies a degree of flexibility, and it implies a degree of the ability to transmit from generation to generation, which means that with the passage of time, culture will develop. The Oxford English Dictionary. I can't believe that 10,000 years ago, there was anybody who had a language that would have required the multi-volume equivalent of the Oxford English Dictionary. Science in the 18th and 19th centuries enabled certain geniuses to figure out enough about electricity so that we could develop a civilization in which electricity is constantly being put to work to get things done for us. And also weapons, maybe even especially weapons. When the Europeans came up with guns, everybody on the planet soon knew they needed guns. The Chinese may have developed gunpowder, but it was the Europeans who used it to create global empires. And that quote about the Japanese, they saw either be industrialized or be gobbled up like the rest, so they industrialized. Meaning they moved from being an archaic society to being a modern industrial society, capable of beating the Russians in 1905. Gradually, societies become more powerful. The British Army of the 19th century could have defeated the Roman Empire of the 2nd century. I think. I've never gamed it out, but I just think that the innovations in weaponry had made something like the Roman army obsolete. So power of civilization is constantly growing. There can be breakdowns. The collapse of the Roman Empire was a collapse of the power systems Uh, it created anarchies that were destructive. And it took centuries for Europe to emerge out of. The destructive forces of disorder. So you can have backsliding, but nonetheless, industrialized Europe was more powerful than the major powers of the Mediterranean ancient world, the Greeks or the Romans or the Phoenicians or the Carthaginians. That was the archaic world. They would not. That was their world. Ended up getting colonized by the gunboats of the Europeans. So it is inevitable. I love to use the word inevitable because basically that's the glue that makes this better human story compelling. So I think. So that's how it looks to me. So over time, the power of a civilization it'll be like the stock market. If you look at the graph over the centuries, the American stock market's at 34,000 now or something. Yeah, I was a little investor when the Dow crossing 1,000 was, that's the chart. Over time, whatever the downs, whatever the crashes, onward and upward. The cumulative nature of culture is that it will become more powerful. And that means that eventually it will cross that line being able to destroy itself. So I think it's close to inevitable that any civilization that emerges anywhere on any planet will eventually be so powerful that the option of destroying itself will be one that they have to confront. I don't know, maybe is it a coincidence that both environmental self-destruction and nuclear holocaust emerged within one lifetime? I don't know. You can see how there might be some relationship, but maybe they would be staggered on some other planet. The problem of war and the power eventually crossing that line that there are weapons so powerful that they could destroy the planet, whether that would take place at the same time as the economic system, the productive operation, industrial or whatever some other planet might create, would be so powerful that it might disrupt the rest of the living planet in some potentially catastrophic way. I don't know. But in our case, they're both happening within my lifetime, basically. And it's inevitable, I think, that any civilization creating species would have to order its civilization well enough, soon enough, to avoid both of those dynamisms of increasing power with destructive potential from crossing into, so there are scenarios of self-destruction become possible. And the problem with Russian roulette is that eventually what can happen, given enough iterations of the experiment, will happen. Even, if you flip coins, hundreds or thousands of times, you'll come up with stretches of 15 heads in a row. Improbable, but I don't think with us at this point it's improbable. We are at a juncture where it looks like a toss-up what the fate of civilization will be. We need to understand that civilization has unleashed certain forces that we have not brought under control enough to make it clear that we're going to survive for the long haul. We haven't put together an international system that would prevent something like this fascist dictator in Russia having command of a vast nuclear arsenal. We can't afford to keep on going with that. We can't afford to have an economic system that functions in such a way that a fossil fuel industry, upon discovering that which is enriching it is endangering the planet itself, endangering human civilization. And facing that terrible possibility, this industry chooses not to warn the world, but to deceive the world so that there won't be support for the steps that a decent, moral, responsible civilization would take. And we've got a political system in which it's possible for an industry like the fossil fuel industry, fabulously wealthy, to buy an American political party to paralyze the country. That's a different force from the one described in the Parable of the Tribes. But I do have a book back there called The Illusion of Choice, How the Market Economy Shapes Our Destiny. I love the market. My father is an economist, but the market has a dynamic of its own, and that's what so one of the dynamics is that we find that it creates something like the fossil fuel industry. And it's not just the fossil fuel industry. I'm going to probably give a little talk because I wrote an op-ed called Who Kills for Money? And it turns out that, to the best of my ability, to find out. And I have some ability because my oldest friend from 5th grade is a world authority on very related matters. And I've asked him, has there ever been an industry that, upon discovering that it constituted a danger to the world in some non-trivial way, chose to do the right thing? He makes his living as an expert witness against the asbestos industry. He is able to nail them to the wall, showing they knew full well all kinds of things that they withheld from the workers they were killing and the communities that they were killing. Just now, he's been involved with a trial in Italy, some Swiss billionaire being tried for 200 and some counts of manslaughter for this little town in Italy that people are still dying because the business he owned kept a secret what they knew. So it wasn't just the fossil fuel industry. It was also the asbestos industry killed for money. And the tobacco industry. I mean, Russell Crowe in that movie, The Insider, I think. The tobacco industry, about the fossil fuel industry, there's a book called Merchants of Doubt. And, it also fits the tobacco industry. They knew full well that they were killing people, and a lot of people. I mean, there's a billboard on I-25 going north from Albuquerque, through Albuquerque, where I lived for a little while. counting up the number of deaths. I mean, by almost 500,000 a year from the smoking of cigarettes. At least this was back 20 some years ago. I don't know what it is anymore. But the tobacco industry knew full well they were killing people, and they were also merchants of doubt. So we've got industries that uniformly choose to kill for money. I do not believe, am I naive? I don't believe that most individuals would kill for money. I wouldn't. I might be a bit of a goody two-shoes, but you know, I have violent dreams sometimes. Not as much as I did when I was young, but I have fantasized myself as a soldier for the good guys in World War II. It's not killing for money, but I'm not a pacifist. And I got some greed in me. But if I knew that what I was doing was killing my neighbor, I would do something about it. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't 90-some% of the people? I don't know. But that's what I believe, is that overwhelming majority of people would not kill for money. So we have another case because of different forces, which eventually I'll talk about that economy, but here is just about what kind of thing are we challenged to do if we want to determine what the fate of human civilization is, that we will pass the test. We need to create a different order so that we don't create industries. The worst of them, I mean, the fossil fuel industry is not only willing to kill 500,000 people a year, it's much bigger than that now. Not because they're worse. I mean, sociopathy is sociopathy. That it don't give a damn about anything but greedy desire that's essentially institutionalized. And that's where the dynamics of the system come in. But we need to create a different kind of world in ways that make it impossible that if we can do okay with this climate crisis, I don't know how big it is already. I mean, maybe our goose is already fairly well cooked, for all I know. But we need to change the game in whatever ways there are, that it no longer can be that we have an industry that can buy a political party that can paralyze us from doing what's necessary to enable human civilization to thrive for the long haul. It's as easy as that. We need to do it. We need to keep that destination in mind. We need to know we ought to get there. So how do we get there? I say, we need to ask ourselves where we want to get. We need to ask the question, what would the world look like where the scenarios of self-destruction are either zero or minimized as much as possible, is, I guess, and I hope that that's zero. I don't know, what we could achieve, but it sure would be good that we're not playing Russian roulette, no matter how many chambers there are. I'd like to have it be an impossibility. I really would like for humankind to be able to create something beautiful that is cumulative in all the good senses. I think we are capable of something beautiful if we can survive long enough. And I don't think we have so many generations because the muddle through option disappears. As soon as, one, you get too powerful, that you're so powerful there's a possibility to destroy yourselves. And two, there aren't that many chambers to spin. that you can afford to take much time to put things in order. So envision what a civilization would look like where neither form of self-destruction is possible. And then I think we ask ourselves, if that is the destination we got to reach, and reach as soon as possible, let's say, but not being unrealistic about, this might take 100 years, 200 years. I don't know. History has left a lot of scars. But if we got that time, at least as fast as possible. I mean, we got no better option than to do our best and move as far as possible in the right direction as fast as possible. That's all we can do. And hope. I mean, hope is a big deal. That's what Pandora was left with when she let all that destructiveness out of the, it's actually not a bad metaphor for us, is it? Hope that we can put it together, feeling fortified to know that we're better creatures than we thought we were, and we're capable of better than we've thought ourselves to be. That seems like, I can see we can do it. I wish I knew that we're going to do it, because I do love the idea that life on Earth will prosper and not be punished for having created creatures like us that got this fantastic kind of consciousness that's able to change all the rules. What a piece of work is man, says Hamlet. In a lot of ways, we really are. I mean, any species that creates someone who can make Michelangelo's David, or write someone who can write Hamlet, or who can write Bach's music, or can put together something like the James Webb Telescope. Oh, isn't that marvelous? What we are at our best, and we're not at our best now, and we were fated not to be at our best for the first whatever millennia of civilization history. We were going to emerge into an inevitable anarchy and unleash inevitably a social evolutionary force. And in the future, I'm going to try to show you how that force connects with all the brokenness we see. And that's pretty exciting too. I mean, it's important to see things whole. So I hope you'll stick with this, putting the pieces together. I think about, I talk about any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos. And while knowing nothing about how many civilization creating creatures there are out there, the sheer magnitude of the numbers of galaxies and stars and planets tells me there must have been a lot. So I have this fantasy I want to share with you. It's about the cosmic historian. Don't ask how he develops his data set, but he's got available to him 100 case studies, or whatever you might think is a good sample of the various civilization creating creatures on the various planets that emerged out of the process, the biological evolutionary process that created them, and plunged, because they developed a creative intelligence to change the rules, they plunged into a disorder that drove their civilization in certain predictable directions, spirit of the gangster, whatever their inherent nature. That some of these creatures in these case studies would be stories of success. When it was a toss-up or whatever, whether they were going to get their act together and order their civilization well, or whether they were going to destroy themselves by some self-inflicted catastrophic means, they got their act together. There'll be some that do it. And then some similar magnitude, if it's a toss-up, And I don't know why it would, if it is a toss-up for humankind, I don't know why we shouldn't just sort of hypothesize it'd be a toss-up any old where. So there's going to be populations of those that succeeded and those that failed. Got their act together, destroyed themselves. Got themselves in good order, never got the forces that emerged out of disorder under sufficient control to prevent those forces from pushing them into self-destruction. So this cosmic historian or social scientist studies these stories. I don't know who wrote the stories. A thought experiment. One is entitled to some things. And he asks himself, or she, I don't, it's fine with me, as long as, whether man or woman, this person needs to be perceptive about what is it that happened in this group of civilizations that enabled them to get their act together. What was different about them from what happened in these that went bad? And there'll be a lot of idiosyncratic and probably chance things that take place. But there will be some patterns that can be discerned. And this good historian, social scientist, will come up with some things. I think that the earlier the creature understood that this is the central challenge, that any species that embarks on that path is going to eventually have to meet, the better. As soon as they recognize that right now we are, they are at a, the earlier they recognize that this is a challenge that's coming. I don't know how many of them would recognize it before it was sort of obvious. In our case, the idea that we're going to destroy ourselves, we recognize that when it already occurred, but maybe somebody could foresee it. But eventually to recognize that it is part of the job, just like it is part of the agony of being a civilization creator, creating species that you're going to end up plunging into a disorder that makes human beings live in a rather malign circumstance, which is implied by a war of all against all, and implied by a selective process that gives the spirit of the gangster a disproportionate say. It's important that we recognize that we are broken in certain ways, that inevitable traumatic history has subjected us to. And then we see the whole. We see the whole and respond to it from the whole. We bring to it our moral and spiritual passions to put ourselves firmly on the side of life. It was inevitable that the emergence of civilization would have important, major, trauma-inducing, nightmarish aspects. But it is not inevitable that the creatures that embark on the path of civilization will fail to get their act together. At least so I believe. I do see a great danger right now. But I believe that if we look at where we are in the social evolutionary process, deciding whether we're going to go toward death or toward life is in the next not so many directions. If we put ourselves to work and invest some serious energy into thinking, where do we need to get to survive for the long haul? And asking, what are the steps now that we can take most wisely that have the best chance of enabling us to make progress toward that destination? I think that's what the societies The societies that did that did it earlier, did it with more focused attention, and steered themselves away from the abyss in time instead of backing into the future, which is what we generally seem to be doing. That got us survival from up to 20, the third millennium. We've had a long run as a civilization creating species, but we're in our final generations of determining whether we're going to meet that challenge or not. Order our civilization well enough, soon enough, for a civilization to survive for the long haul, rather than end the human story in failure and self-inflicted catastrophe. So please join me in getting a view of our situation, to fortify us, to put our energies more passionately and more effectively to work, to move us toward life, long haul, human civilization, realizing the best potentialities that are within us. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Yeah,